welcome to another episode of Conversations with G&G. And today we're thrilled to have Shannon Bowman joining us. Shannon is an integrative psychotherapist who's passionate about helping people address the core of their mental health challenges. With his extensive background as an accredited mental health social worker, EMDR practitioner and psychotherapist, also a counsellor, Shannon specialises in guiding clients through trauma, PTSD, anxiety and more. His innovative approach combines cutting-edge therapeutic techniques to foster emotional resilience and holistic well-being. Shannon, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Now, Shannon, that's a lot. I mean, you are obviously a very skilled mental health professional. You see a lot of people off camera before. You were telling us some of the things that you deal with, including even, compassion fatigue, carer fatigue, some burnout. Do you see that a lot in your practice with carers?
Yeah, and I guess we've been seeing it more over the last few years. So since like post-COVID, I think that was really hard on everyone. So a lot more burnout, a lot more compassion fatigue. I'm having a lot more organisations who are experiencing it in their workforce reaching out to me to run workshops and have talks on it. So definitely noticing it a lot more.
Yeah, it's a really big task, isn't it, caring for someone we love?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a family member who's just gone into aged care, and over the last 2 years, we've actually had to do caring roles in my family as well, having them live in our house, and they're going through the early stages of dementia. So it's really taxing. Like I see it in my clients and the organisations we work with, but having experienced it personally, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, it's massive.
What is compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma? Would you be able to talk to us about what they are?
Yeah, of course. So vicarious trauma is sort of being exposed to someone else's trauma. So if we're looking at it from the lens of a carer, for example, day in, day out, you're exposed to small traumatic things, watching that person you love or care for not being able to do the same things that they would once upon a time, or them having emotional breakdowns. And you're also heightened senses all the time. So this is really hard on your nervous system. And if you're going through that for a really long time, it starts to wear you down. So compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, they're much of the same, but it's when you start to notice things shift in your own sort of mindset. You're not as empathetic as you might have been before. You're finding yourself quite irritated maybe when before you would be easygoing. And you start to dread doing the role that you once really loved and cared about. So it doesn't happen overnight, but it just creeps up on you. So I'll give you an example. I'm a EMDR trained, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So that's a trauma treatment. So I'm exposed to that day in, day out. And if I was to be working with the same sort of client every day, someone who's been having a car accident, for example, 5 days a week, 5 clients a day, I'm talking about car accidents, hearing all the ins and outs of the car accidents. I'm not actually having a car accident myself, but I'm hearing about it all the time. I start to have a worldview that changes about being in a car might be dangerous, or I should be more cautious here. And then I might start to become more irritated when I'm in the car. So that is a sign of vicarious trauma, just hearing and being exposed to these things all the time.
Wow. So what are some of the things that we can do? Like, what are some of the things that you would do yourself, because you are, with people all the time hearing about some of their troubles or issues that they're having? What do you do for yourself?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess what I do for myself is try to stop and celebrate the little wins that you get in a caring role. Obviously, there's a lot of hard things that happen, but there's also things that happen that might be really rewarding. So trying not to skip over them and trying to remind yourself why you do this role, because there's probably a deep reason we do these types of roles, and trying to check in with yourself about that. Other things I do is try not to overwork. I try not to book clients every day, all day. I try to give myself enough space and time. I try to take regular breaks. I also get my own therapy. So I'm not immune to mental health challenges or vicarious trauma. So I make sure I seek professional support when I need to. And I guess from a day-to-day lens, it's being self-aware. So knowing your own limits and trying to actually stick to your own limits, because we might know our limits, but if we've got that caring nature in us, we quite often push ourselves too far, and we've got to recognise when we're doing that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting.
Absolutely, such an important topic for all our audience and for us, and very relevant. I'm intrigued to go deeper into some of the techniques that you use day in and day out, and some of I'm more particularly interested in the simple tips and techniques you use that all of us can maybe use for ourselves.
So simple techniques to like mitigate like risks of burnout and things like that. I think it comes down to boundaries. So if you don't have solid boundaries and know where you have to draw the line, you can't really take care of yourself, and you'll struggle to take care of the person who needs the care as well. Because if you're not sticking to your boundaries, you're constantly like pushing yourself a little bit too far each day, you're not going to end up giving the care that you would hope to, because you're not going to show up the way that someone who's in a healthy frame of mind would. You're going to show up tired and irritated. So boundaries would be the number one thing. And lots of people might be thinking, well, I know what my boundaries are, but have you ever actually wrote them down on a piece of paper? And do you know whether you have sort of secure boundaries or porous boundaries or rigid boundaries? So identifying where you are in that will really help you be able to stop vicarious trauma interrupting your life.
That's a great tip. I love that. So write down what boundaries mean to you, and so that you can identify when things happen, and you know your safety space and where to stop.
Something that I've seen a lot, Shannon, with carers is the lack of boundaries as far as saying no, but also in dealing with guilt. Like maybe the person they're caring for example, might have dementia, and so they're anxious and they don't want to be left alone. And so the carer is like, man, I need a break, but I can't take one because, then they're going to freak out, and then that causes a whole heap more trauma. So they put their own self-care on the line, or maybe they're dealing with family members that just aren't stepping up. What would you say around that kind of thing? Like when you've got a carer that maybe doesn't know how to say no.
And that's probably very common, I imagine, carers not saying no. So that people-pleasing, feeling like they can't stop, they're letting people down, that guilt, that shame. I can see that happening quite a lot. I guess everyone has to kind of be on the same page. If there's a network and there's more than just a carer, they have to be communicating and having an idea about what are some of the risk factors here, and what could actually happen if we don't take care of ourselves, because it has a ripple effect through the whole family system. If the carer's getting worn out, well, then they're going to be more irritated to the wider family, and it just keeps going around. And then all of a sudden there's ruptures all throughout the family. So I think, talking about these types of things, helping a carer know that they're allowed to stop, and if they do stop, there's going to be someone else who can step in, whether that's through like professional support networks or family units, but having a way that they're allowed to stop. They don't have to keep going. Telling them that their boundaries are okay to have them.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, it's so cliche, isn't it? That old saying, we can't fill others from an empty cup, but we also need to make sure that we're being poured into in whatever ways, that happens. And that's unique for all of us because we don't all get filled up by the same things. Yeah. What about those fill up things, Shannon? What would you suggest with that? Because there are ways of doing it sometimes, like obviously respite, if you don't have family there to step in. But what about the little things like a carer finding things to do and things that they can take part in that actually give them joy?
Yeah, I guess that would be like a personal preference, but I think whatever they end up doing, making sure they schedule it in so they don't just leave it, oh, that's going to be a good idea to do that. They have to actually schedule it in, because I find if I don't schedule things in, it's rare that I'll actually do it.
That's so true.
Making sure I book it in. So even if it's like I'm going to see my therapist so I can let off some of my emotional steam, I have to book it in, have to know that's going to happen, get that habit happening, regularly doing the same thing. So, any sort of exercise, engaging in personal well-being strategies, learning new things. I think that puts us into a different frame of mind as well. So, Lots of little things they can do.
Yeah, I love what you said about the appointment thing. It is something that I've had to do as part of learning my own boundaries, a few years ago. And in fact, even today, I had to set a boundary with someone. And I literally, on one particular day a week, I make an appointment with myself for that self-care. And people are like, they don't know what the appointment is, but it's a legitimate appointment.
Yeah.
And I had someone trying to push, can't we just do it this week? And I thought, you know what, if I break that boundary now, it'll be forever broken.
Yeah.
So, unless it's like an absolute legitimate emergency, I just hold my line and have that time and guard it as sacred. And I'll tell you what, when you get boundaries like that, it revolutionises everything. You don't end up as exhausted. You get an inner strength that you didn't have before by holding the line on that stuff. And I think you end up then more refreshed and recharged, that you do then have more energy and more reserve to give where you need to give.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think the people who don't have clear boundaries often have a history of childhood trauma. So they might have had experiences where their boundaries have been crossed repeatedly throughout their whole life. So for them to develop real boundaries in adulthood, it's quite difficult. So relying on professional supports and their employment assistance programs or other professional counselling or psychology to get that help.
Yeah, that's exactly my story. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this the kind of service that you also provide, Shannon, yourself?
Yeah. So we work with a lot of different people. Some are carers and organisations. So we run workshops, we do individual therapy, we run professional development days. We have carers who access funding through different services and come to us when they're feeling burnt out. So we work with them quite a lot.
Fantastic. And back to techniques and your method, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
What will be one of the more successful methods that you use day in and day out?
I use a lot of innovative things. So because if I was to tell you, okay, go do meditation every day, it's going to really help you, you probably might maybe able to stick at it for 2 days. But realistically, it's going to get boring or tiresome, and it's just not going to be something that most people would stick with. Some people who are really committed might be able to go do that. But the average person who's a carer, who's struggling, who's already stressed, can't actually fit in another thing on top of it. So I can't tell someone this really scripted thing where they're going to have to go do it every day, because I don't ever have clients come in and if I've done that say, yep, I stuck at it. I've done it every day for the last 2 weeks, because it's just impossible. So starting really small, starting with something that could be as simple as instead of taking your laptop home at night, leaving it in the office. Something that's not going to be too big, and you want to start to build on that. So where the innovative sort of stuff comes in, I get people to download an app that's based around EMDR, so it uses bilateral stimulation to help you process information that hasn't been processed. So I get them to listen to that for just 2 minutes a day, and that helps people at the end of their day download a whole heap of information and feelings that they might have had throughout their day in a lot quicker way. So if they can have that between stopping their caring role and getting home, and they can at least walk into their house. It's only taken them 2 minutes, and they can feel a lot lighter.
Wow.
I'll give you the app after today.
Okay.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, Australian psychologist developed it. And he works in pain and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, but it works in all sorts of environments. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll be able to share with our network as well, for sure. Great for that. Look forward to checking it out.
Yeah, sure.
Good.
Very good.
Wow. So Shannon, what advice would you give to people that are in the middle of that struggle right now?
I guess it's so isolating that sometimes you can feel like you're just doing it all alone. And I guess personally, when I feel like I'm doing something all alone, it's really, really hard to reach out. But it's a thing that you need to do. So, if you're going through that at the moment and you're feeling isolated and alone, reach out to someone. Lighten the load by talking about it is the first step. And then trying to get some sort of professional support, because the longer you leave something the harder it is to get over. So, yeah, early intervention is something that I always recommend, and that can be as simple as just asking another family member for help, or talking to a counsellor if they need to.
Yeah. Fantastic.
You mentioned before funding, government funding for assistance. Could you talk a little bit about what's available for those who might be listening and think, would be great to get that opportunity?
Yeah, so I guess it depends what type of carer you are, whether you're working in a professional setting like a support worker, or you're someone works in aged care or some sort of thing like that. You can usually get employment assistance. So that's where your employer has a contract with an organisation like mine, and you get a number of free sessions per year, which I encourage everyone to use because it's part of your overall package. So it's not that cheap to go see a therapist. So using that to the full extent, even if you're not experiencing compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, utilising those resources because they are yours. And other funding streams come through different sort of caring packages. So there's some government funding, and there's other things that people can access. I don't actually have them on hand at the moment, but I can email those details and stuff if you like.
Yeah, we can perhaps provide those to our listeners as well. Yeah, so like things like EAP, sometimes support workers or paid carers feel like, I don't need it because I'm not that bad. But it's so important to actually reach out and get the help early, really, really early. So like you mentioned, it doesn't get worse over time. So they're highly, highly encouraging carers to reach out and use that resource.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, scheduling it in. So if you know you've got 6 sessions per year, and if you're being proactive, at the start of the year, you would say, all right, I'm going to book one a quarter. And then if I have a really stressful point in the year, I'm going to use those other 2 sessions to really focus on my stress. And that's part of your package through your workplace, so why not access it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you learn what EAP is, because if I've just joined an organisation, I've only been there for 6 months, I've never had employment assistance before, it's quite foreign. And if someone's saying, just go use this, it's going to help you, without actually telling me how it's going to help and what are the boundaries around it and what I can actually talk about in there. Is it just the workplace I'm meant to talk about, or am I allowed to talk about my personal struggles? So helping people know what employment assistance is and that it's part of their overall package. So the organisation's already paying for it, so you may as well be utilising these services and the resources. Sometimes it's only you can access different free resources. It might be upskilling in a certain area, or it might be a mini program on something, or it might be talking to a counsellor for 6 sessions about whether it's personal or professional or a mixture of both, because we are, I guess, whole people. Our personal life impacts our professional lives and vice versa. So helping people understand what it really is EAP is for and why it's there.
Yeah. It's interesting too, Shannon, because I remember when I was working for a certain organisation, and it was a government department, and we had EAP, and there were a lot of people that had this misconception that, well, if I go to EAP, then they're going to know I've got issues, or especially if it was a work-related thing, or they didn't want to mix their personal stuff with their work stuff, or lose their job because of it, or have information go back to the employer, when the reality is, as mental health professionals, we're bound by confidentiality unless, there's self-harm or something like that, or they're going to harm somebody else. We have a need to disclose in those kinds of situations with harm or abuse. But other than that, they can't. It is like completely private, and it's free because it's part of your employment package. So what are some of the things with that? Like, I mean, you guys know that you've got 300 odd employees. What do you guys notice about that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think there is still concern about the confidentiality, and we always reiterate it. It's a completely separate organisation that manages that, and none of that information comes back to us at all.
Yeah.
So
and legally it can't, right?
And even when you talk about some instances of reporting, that wouldn't be reported back to the employer. It would be reported to other, I'm guessing, other avenues, not the employer themselves. So definitely, I think I would say confidentiality. And then the other thing I think is just people just feeling like they don't need it, whereas it's the the assistance can go from preventative assistance all the way to critical or crisis assistance. So it's something that carers can tap into at any stage during their journey, even if they just want to debrief about an event that's happened or something that's happened with a client, they didn't want to talk to the employer. That's a possible avenue for them. So, I would say it's a bit of a mix there.
Yeah, and we always promote that program consistently through newsletters, emails, text messages. And yet the uptake hasn't been, I would say, maybe about 60%. Yeah, 60% of our employees have signed up, and there is still a big chunk out there that
Feel like they don't need it.
They haven't tapped it into.
Yeah.
And the other thing is switching the focus from, as Giselle mentioned, crisis management mindset to more of a proactive approach, preventative. I think that's where we want to be playing really with our people, with anyone that we love and care about, right? So proactively, again, reach out and look after your health holistically.
And that's why understanding the early signs is so important, because you need everyone to know these early signs. So if you start to see, my mum who's caring for my dad is not sleeping well, or this is happening, then you can sort of tap them on the shoulder and have a conversation with them to seek some help. They might not even see it themselves that that's an issue, but so important for us all to be watching and assisting and flagging it to each other.
I think it's a mindset shift as well. Looking at EAP as it's part of your role as a carer. So part of my role is to make sure I am well enough to do my role. And if I'm taking it really seriously and there's these opportunities to learn skills to regulate my emotions, skills to manage my own personal issues going on in my life and have them separate from my role, I should be taking that up, especially if my organisation is providing this service and they want me to do it. I should be thinking about how am I going to use this resource to make sure I'm doing my role correctly.
That's such a good point. It's like a part of professional development.
Yeah.
You're going to learn so many good tools and strategies for future events as well, just by making that phone call.
Yeah.
It's a responsibility. It's like you own to your people, to your clients.
Yeah.
The need to continuously, look after yourself so that you can pour to others.
Yeah. And I think in the mix of that too is, another issue we haven't talked about, and that is the fact that we can sometimes lose ourselves when we're caring for other people. And so what strategies, Shannon, would you recommend for people that maybe need to reconnect with their passion or their purpose?
Well, I guess if you're in the depths of being disconnected from yourself, it's really hard to be self-aware enough to notice that. So if you can get along to an employment assistance program or have someone ask you a few questions, then you start to go, well, hang on a minute, I'm not playing sport, or I'm not seeing my friends, or I haven't actually been out with my partner in 6 months. So you can start to have these little aha moments that I'm actually not doing any of the things that I used to do, and maybe this role has started to impact my life. So unless you have that self-awareness or you're understanding what's actually going on, it's hard to make change. So getting that self-awareness first.
Yeah. And so say hypothetically you've gone to EAP, that's being sort of tapped into and somebody's ready to explore those things, because let's be honest, when we're feeling fulfilled and we feel like we have meaning and purpose, then we go on to do great things, and we can sometimes get that it brings energy. So what are some of the techniques that you would use to help someone reconnect at that point and find that energy?
Well, first you want to address some of the symptoms that they might be experiencing. So if it's fatigue or it's burnout or their compassion fatigue, how are we going to make sure we're addressing those things so that they have enough energy to pursue whatever they want to do? So I guess going through a whole therapy period would be ideal, so you can uncover what's actually going on for them and what are those psychological blocks that are actually stopping them from doing the things that they want to do. But yeah, getting them to, I guess, look at why they're really involved in this role. What is it they create meaning from it, trying to reconnect to that. How did they get into it? What's their purpose? Is caring still where they want to be, or are they looking at going to another sort of role? So yeah, really exploring and uncovering with them.
Yeah. Yeah, wow.
And you mentioned the innovative approach that your practice, often utilize. Can you tell us some other techniques that you can share with us?
So the main one we use is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So when you go through a traumatic experience, whether that be like a singular event trauma, like getting hit by a car and injuring yourself, or whether it's like abuse over a long period of time, at the time of the event, our brain is not working in its full capacity. So all the stress that's going on in our bodies and in our brain makes it harder for the brain to process information. By processing information, I mean like those bodily experiences of anxiety or fear or terror, the visual component of the event, and the belief that might go along with it. The belief might be like, I'm in danger, or something terrible is happening, whatever that might be. So part of the brain called the hippocampus, which puts the time and date stamp on our memories, is offline. So it's not working. So you don't process the information, and it gets stuck. So it's not gone into that long-term memory, neatly filed away. It's stuck. So your brain then kicks into overdrive, because your brain always is trying to go back to homeostasis, but it can't because it's something stuck. So I use the analogy of like, if I've got a splinter in my thumb, my brain is constantly trying to heal my thumb, but it can't because there's something stuck there. But the moment I pull that splinter out, I don't have to tell my brain, go on, heal my thumb. It'll just do it because it knows how to do it. So if you think about the stuck memory in your brain, you're getting triggers, you're getting flashbacks, you're not sleeping well, you're avoiding places. So that's your brain trying to work out this experience that it doesn't know how to. So it doesn't have a start to the story, a middle, and an end. It's still trying to work out what's going on. How do I get through this? So we use EMDR, so eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, to help your brain unlock that memory in a psychotherapy session in a safe environment. And we overload the brain and we tax the working memory of the brain. And when we tax the working memory of the brain, people will notice that the feelings in their body will dissipate. So all those stress feelings that we've got going on, tight, choking feelings, they go away. And the actual event, the images in their brain that were imprinted, they start to fade. So people will say, it feels a lot more distant. It feels like I'm looking at it from a different perspective. And the moment those two things happen, you get this other beautiful thing happen, which is adaptive information will start coming into the brain. So when they came in the session, they were telling me, oh, I did such a bad thing, it was my fault. But by the end of the session, because all those feelings have gone away and all the adaptive information's coming back in, they have a new look at it and they're like, maybe it wasn't all my fault, or maybe there was more to it than what I thought. And that's how we deal with post-traumatic stress disorder.
And you find that what would be the success rate
well, it's a
to that technique?
It's a gold standard. So the World Health Organization recommend this as a first line for trauma. So a single event, one isolated trauma, 3 to 6 sessions, but long-term historical trauma could be quite a long time. Yeah,
Wow.
depends what it is.
What was it called?
EMDR, so eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Yeah, EMDR.
Fantastic.
Wow.
And what's your story? How did you come into this space? Can you tell us a bit about your motivations?
Yeah, of course.
Why you do what you do?
Yeah. So I guess I come from a history of where I've experienced quite a number of traumatic things growing up. So born with a physical disability, so distal arthrogryposis, so impacted both my hands. So I couldn't really use my hands much growing up. Had multiple surgeries in plaster for probably all up, both my arms for maybe 2.5 years. So that was very hard. And then we also lost my brother. So he died when he was quite young. And then my family lost their family business and we went bankrupt. And then not long after that, on Christmas Day when I think I was 9, my father passed away. So by the age of 9, I've already gone through quite a lot of trauma and had lots of things happening. So I guess I became acutely aware of other people's emotions and my emotions and what safety actually feels like, because most of that time I didn't feel very safe emotionally. So growing through high school, I struggled with high school quite a lot because unresolved trauma. And then when I got into adulthood, I sought out my own therapy in my early 20s and started to open up to different ways people can be and what my history was like and making sense of that. And then in my mid-20s, I was living over in Canada at the time, and I'd just been traveling through the US with a bunch of my friends, and we just hiked up Yosemite, and then we'd gone back to camp, and I was like, all right, it's time. So I got online and booked my flight back to Australia and enrolled in university, and then moved to Melbourne and studied my first degree, then did another degree, and then went on to do specialisation, and then opened my first clinic in Melbourne back in 2018. Did that for about a year and a half in Melbourne, then moved to Geelong late 2019. Then the pandemic kicked off early 2020, and so I left my job, my full-time job, and went all in on the business, and haven't looked back since. So now there's 13 of us all up. So, and we specialise in helping people with trauma. So whether that's carers or someone who's experienced some sort of post-traumatic stress incident in their life, it could be an assault or a car accident or losing a loved one, and we use innovative approaches to help people recover faster.
Fantastic, what a story.
Yeah. And what are the major things, would you say, from when you were growing up, going through that to today, how we've progressed with dealing with trauma? If you would have seen a massive shift.
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever asked me when I was young, like, what's this like? I definitely don't think anyone ever mentioned the word trauma back then. It was kind of just like a bit of a suck it up mentality back then. Just get on with life, which is not good for trauma. It just makes people feel ashamed of their experiences, makes people not want to talk about them. And your brain doesn't like that. Your brain is going to then have to come up with all these sophisticated coping strategies to help you suppress all your experiences, and that's exhausting. So, I think that would be a big thing that changes people understanding what trauma is and how it impacts the brain, and what other options to get through it, what sort of therapies work, what don't work. Organisations are more willing to talk about mental health. We have mental health days, and we have neurodivergent days, and we have survivors days. So we're a lot more open to having these types of conversations. But back then we weren't. Like, we just weren't equipped for it, I don't think. Yeah.
That's so true. And there's still a lot more that should be done out there in the industry to provide that awareness of, hey, just, reach out, and there's a lot of help out there.
And it's one of the hardest things to do, I think. Like, I know when I'm really stressed, I'll often revert to my coping strategies of when I'm a young person, which is to isolate myself and to not want to ask for help. Because when I was young, I probably didn't know what help was going to actually look like, whether anyone could help me. So, I find when you're really stressed or under the pump, you often revert to old versions of yourself. So you've got to be pretty sort of proactive and trying to, actually take some action.
Overcome that and, reach out.
Yeah, ask for help. Yeah.
So how can, like with our little ones, our children, what are some of the things that we can do now at an early age to sort of get them in that right, like teaching them the right way?
Yeah.
I guess it starts from then.
Yeah. I guess in an ideal world, both parents are healthy and able to attend to the child's needs, so they develop a secure attachment. If your young person in your life develops a secure attachment, they're going to find it a lot easier to ask for help. They're going to be a lot better at regulating their emotions, and they're going to genuinely flow through life. Obviously, they're going to have problems like everyone does, but they're going to be the part of the population that get by a little bit easier. So they're quite good in relationships, and they're quite easygoing. So that average about 45% of the population. So as parents, it's our role to make sure that we are attending to our children's needs, and we're sort of explaining to them things, and we're helping them understand the world in a lens that's suitable for their age. So just trying to be proactive in our parenting and trying to focus on developing a secure attachment is the number one thing that you can do for your kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it starts in the house and the relationship with your parents, and make sure all that is nice and healthy and supportive. And
and there's trust, so they can know when they need help that they can get help.
So true. Yeah.
So interesting.
Well, Shannon, thank you for being with us today. It's been extremely insightful, and we know that our listeners too and our viewers are all going to be just, I guess, super pumped to be able to get into setting some boundaries and getting some help and some support in their roles as carers, and maybe even people just dealing with anxiety, or maybe they've got some childhood trauma. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
It's been a great,
interesting. It's been
great session for sure.
Yeah.
I can't wait to watch this and tap into your resources that you'll be sharing with us. I'm looking forward to going through all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again.
Fantastic.
Thank you all for tuning in today. We're so grateful to have you here, and we hope that you found today's session valuable. Please be sure to check our website for more resources and blog posts, and share these insights with your networks and support other carers and caregivers. See you next month.